The silence in the house was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It had been a week since we buried Mark, a week since the last casserole dish had been returned, and the last sympathetic murmur had faded from the doorway. Now, the silence was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered every other sound. It pooled in the corners of the living room, where Mark's armchair sat empty, and clung to the curtains he had helped me hang just last summer. My 10-year-old son, Leo, had become a creature of that silence. He moved through the rooms like a ghost, his footsteps impossibly light on the hardwood floors. He hadn't really cried, not in the way I had, with racking sobs that left me hollowed out and breathless. Leo's grief was a quiet, internal thing, a shutter pulled down behind his deep brown eyes, the same eyes his father had. He spent hours in his room, meticulously organizing his Legos, or reading the same dog-eared fantasy novel over and over, its spine cracked and soft. Mark's death had been a thief in the night. A brain aneurysm, the doctors said. One minute, he was complaining of a headache after a long day at the construction business he ran with his brother, David. The next, he was gone. No long goodbyes, no chance to say the things you always assume you'll have time to say. He was 48. I was 46. We were supposed to have decades left. The only people who broke the suffocating quiet were David and his wife, Cynthia. They'd appointed themselves the executors of our grief, swooping in daily with a kind of predatory concern. David, with his expensive suits and a smile that never quite reached his eyes, would clap me on the shoulder and talk about handling the practicalities. Cynthia, dripping in understated jewelry, would scan our modest suburban home with a critical gaze, sighing about how much there was to sort out. "Ellen, dear," she'd said yesterday, running a manicured finger over the dusty fireplace mantel, "you mustn't worry about a thing. David will make sure everything is taken care of. That's what family is for." But their presence felt less like family and more like a circling of vultures. They spoke of Mark in the past tense with an ease that turned my stomach. They discussed the business, Mark and David's, as if the first name was already an historical footnote. This afternoon, the official will reading was scheduled to take place right here, in our living room. It felt like a violation, turning our sanctuary of memory into a sterile legal theater. David had insisted. "It's simpler this way, Ellen. No need for you and Leo to travel. We'll bring the lawyer to you." I sat on the sofa, clutching a lukewarm mug of tea, and watched Leo push a toy car along the pattern of the area rug. He hadn't spoken a full sentence all morning. "Are you hungry, sweetie?" I asked, my voice sounding rusty. He shook his head, his dark hair falling over his forehead. He kept his eyes locked on the car. I remembered Mark, just a month ago, lying on this very floor with Leo, making exaggerated engine noises as they raced cars from one end of the rug to the other. The memory was a sharp, physical pain in my chest. Before the illness, before the secret surgery he'd had a few weeks ago for what he'd told me was a minor blockage, Mark had been worried. He'd been quiet and distracted. He'd spent a lot of time with Leo, taking him into his home office and closing the door. When I asked what they were doing, Mark just smiled and said, "Teaching him to be a man. Important life lessons." I thought they were just having father-son time. Now I wasn't so sure. The doorbell chimed, a shrill, unwelcome sound. My heart hammered against my ribs. Leo flinched, pulling the toy car into his lap and wrapping his arms around his knees. I stood up, smoothed down my black dress, and walked to the door. On the other side stood David and Cynthia, and behind them, a stern-looking man in a gray suit holding a leather briefcase. Mr. Thompson, the family lawyer. The show was about to begin. "Mr. Ellen," David said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Ready to get this over with?" David and Cynthia swept into the living room as if they were taking possession of a new property. David gestured for Mr. Thompson to take Mark's armchair, Mark's chair, and the lawyer sat down stiffly, placing his briefcase on the floor beside him. Cynthia perched on the edge of a love seat, her posture ramrod straight, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. "Where's Leo?" David asked, his eyes scanning the room. "He's right here," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Leo was still on the floor, trying to make himself as small as possible. Cynthia gave a little tsk-tsk sound. Poor boy. This must be so confusing for him. David, perhaps he should go to his room. No, I said, stepping between them and my son. He stays. Mark would have wanted him here. My words were a shield of my own. I looked at Leo, who gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. He was scared, but he wanted to stay. He was the man of the house now, a title no 10-year-old should ever have to bear. David shrugged, a gesture of magnanimous condescension. As you wish, Ellen. We just want to make this as painless as possible. Painless. The word hung in the air, a cruel joke. Every breath I took was painful. Every empty space in the house was a source of agony. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick document bound in a blue cover. Shall we begin? He asked, not looking at anyone in particular. Please, David said, leaning forward with an air of eager solemnity. I sat back down on the sofa, pulling Leo close to me. He leaned against my side, his small body tense. I wrapped an arm around his shoulders, my hand resting on the spot where his heart was beating a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The lawyer began to read in a monotone drone, the legalese washing over me in a meaningless tide. Last will and testament of Mark J. Peterson, being of sound mind and body. My mind drifted. I saw Mark in the kitchen, flipping pancakes on a Saturday morning, a smudge of flour on his nose. I saw him in the backyard, teaching Leo how to throw a baseball, his laughter echoing in the summer air. I saw him sitting right where I was now, his arm around me as we watched a movie, his familiar, comforting weight beside me. How could a man so full of life be reduced to a stack of paper? Cynthia's voice snapped me back to the present. Could you repeat that last part, Mr. Thompson? My focus sharpened. I looked at the lawyer, then at David and Cynthia. David was wearing a placid, almost bored expression, but Cynthia was leaning forward, her eyes glittering with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Mr. Thompson adjusted his glasses. To my beloved wife, Ellen Peterson, he read, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. I leave my personal effects, including my collection of vintage vinyl records, and the sum of $10,000 to help her transition into a new chapter of her life. The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds. Transition? New chapter? It sounded like something from a corporate layoff. And the house? I whispered, my voice a thread. The lawyer continued, his gaze fixed on the page. To my brother, David Peterson, I bequeath the remainder of my estate. This includes my 50% ownership of Peterson & Sons Construction, all financial accounts, investment portfolios, and the property located at 45 Elm Street. He had just named my address. Our address? Our home. The silence that followed was different from the one I'd been living in. This was a sharp, cold silence, the kind that precedes a crack of lightning. I stared at David, waiting for him to laugh, to tell me this was some kind of horrible, twisted joke. He didn't. He just looked at me with a practiced expression of sympathy. I know this is a shock, Ellen. Mark and I discussed it. Of sympathy. He was worried about you being able to manage everything on your own. This is for the best. I'll take care of everything. Take care of everything, I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. David, this is my home. This is Leo's home. Cynthia finally spoke, her voice smooth as silk and just as cold. It was Mark's home, dear, and he wanted David to have it. He wanted to make sure the family legacy, the business, was secure. My blood ran cold. I felt Leo tremble beside me. The vultures weren't just circling anymore. They had landed, and they were starting to feast. The world had tilted on its axis. The familiar living room, with its family photos on the mantel and the faint scuff marks on the floor from Leo's toys, suddenly felt alien, a stage set for my own destruction. I don't understand, I stammered, looking from David's plastic face to Mr. Thompson's impassive one. Mark would never. He loved this house. He loved us. This can't be right, David sighed, a long, suffering sound he had perfected over the years. Ellen, grief can make things confusing. The document is clear. It's all been notarized and witnessed. This is what Mark wanted. No, I said, shaking my head, a desperate denial rising in my throat. No, he wouldn't leave his son without a home. He wouldn't leave me with his records and a pittance. The words came out choked. The $10,000 felt like the deepest insult of all, a tip for a decade and a half of love and partnership. Mr. Thompson, as if on cue, reached back into his briefcase. He pulled out two more items. The first was a heavy, polished wooden box. An urn. Mark's ashes. He placed it on the coffee table between us with a soft, final thud. The second was a crisp white envelope. He slid it across the table toward me. My name was typed on the front. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "A formality," David said smoothly, not even giving the lawyer a chance to speak. "Just so everything is clear. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings." My fingers felt numb as I picked up the envelope. The paper was cold and stiff. I tore it open and unfolded the single sheet inside. It was an eviction notice, a legal document, printed in stark black letters, informing me that I had 24 hours to vacate the premises. A gasp escaped my lips. It was a raw, wounded sound. 24 hours. They were throwing me and my grieving son out onto the street. "You can't do this," I whispered, staring at David. The mask of sympathy was gone, replaced by a cool, hard finality. This was who he really was. "It's not me, Ellen. It's the will," he said. "I'm just the executor. My hands are tied." He spread his own hands, clean and uncalloused, a stark contrast to the way Mark's had always been, rough and capable from years of hard work. Cynthia stood up, smoothing the front of her dress. "We'll be generous, of course," she said, her voice a parody of charity. "We'll send a moving company tomorrow afternoon to help you with your personal belongings. We've already arranged for a storage unit for you. The first month is on us." The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. They had planned this. Every last detail. They had been waiting for Mark to die so they could tear our lives apart. The business, the house, everything. Mark had built that company from the ground up, with David as a junior partner who handled the books. How could he have done this? I felt a wave of dizziness. My world, already shattered by Mark's death, was now being ground into dust. I had no fight left in me. All the strength had drained away, leaving only a hollow shell of despair. I clutched the urn to my chest. This was all I had left of him, a box of ash and a collection of old records. "Fine," I said, the word barely audible. I stood up on shaky legs. "Leo, let's go pack a bag." Defeated, I turned to walk away, to retreat to the bedroom and figure out how to survive the next 24 hours. David and Cynthia exchanged a look, a quick, triumphant glance that they thought I didn't see. I was at the doorway, my hand on the frame to steady myself, when I felt a small, insistent tug on the sleeve of my dress. I looked down. It was Leo. He hadn't moved from his spot beside the sofa. He was looking up at me, his face pale, but his expression strangely focused. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, steely resolve that I hadn't seen before. It was Mark's look, the one he got right before he solved a difficult problem. He leaned in close and spoke, his voice a clear, firm whisper, meant only for me, but loud enough to cut through the suffocating atmosphere of the room. He said the 7 words his father had made him memorize. "Ask Mr. Abernathy about the real will." The 7 words hung in the air, a life raft thrown into a churning sea of despair. For a moment, I could only stare down at my son, at the fierce determination in his young face. Ask Mr. Abernathy about the real will. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Abernathy? The lawyer in front of us was Thompson. Real will? Did that mean this one was fake? David let out a short, dismissive laugh. "What's that, champ? What are you talking about?" He spoke to Leo with the patronizing tone one uses for a child talking about imaginary friends. But Leo didn't look at his uncle. His eyes were locked on mine, willing me to understand. A spark ignited within the hollowed-out cavern of my chest. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something sharper, more primal, fight. Mark had been a planner, a meticulous man who measured twice and cut once. He was also fiercely protective. He wouldn't have left us like this, not willingly. The thought, which had been a desperate prayer moments ago, was now solidifying into a conviction. "What did you say, Leo?" I asked, my voice low and steady. He repeated the words, a little louder this time. "Dad made me learn it. He said if anything bad happened, I had to tell you. Ask Mr. Abernathy about the real will." I turned my gaze from my son to the three adults who were trying to dismantle my life. Cynthia looked annoyed, as if a child's outburst was a breach of decorum. David looked amused, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. But Mr. Thompson flinched. It was a small, barely perceptible movement, a slight tightening of his jaw, a quick dart of his eyes away from mine. But I saw it. And in that instant, I knew. Leo's words were a key, and they had just turned a lock in Mr. Thompson. "Who is Mr. Abernathy?" I demanded, my voice ringing with a newfound authority that surprised even me. I took a step back into the room, away from the doorway of defeat. Thompson cleared his throat again, a nervous tick this time. I'm afraid I don't know anyone by that name." The boy must be confused. It's been a traumatic time for him. "Don't you dare talk about him like he's not here," I snapped, my protective instincts roaring to life. "He is not confused. He is repeating the words his father taught him." I fixed my stare on the lawyer. "You're lying. I saw your face. Who is Mr. Abernathy?" "Ellen, this is ridiculous," David interjected, stepping forward. "You're hysterical. The will has been read. It's over. Now you need to start packing." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, the words like steel. "Not until I know what this means." I looked at Leo, who gave me another small, encouraging nod. It was all the strength I needed. His father had left him a mission, a weapon, and my son was brave enough to use it. The least I could do was honor that. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking slightly, but not from weakness, from adrenaline. I opened the browser and typed in the search bar, "Abernathy Attorney." I added our city and state. The results loaded instantly. The first one was a small independent firm downtown, Abernathy and Associates, estate planning and family law. My heart began to beat a powerful, rhythmic drum against my ribs. It was real. He was real. "That's enough," David said, his voice rising in anger. The calm facade was cracking. "You're making a scene. Thompson, this is concluded, isn't it?" "Yes, of course," Thompson mumbled, beginning to pack his briefcase with fumbling, hurried movements. He wanted out. I ignored them both. I tapped the phone number on the screen. It rang once, twice. My breath hitched. What if no one answered? What if it was just a dead end, a fantasy cooked up by my grieving mind? A calm, elderly voice answered on the third ring. Up by my grieving Abernathy and Associates. This is Arthur Abernathy speaking. I almost dropped the phone. "Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice tight. "My name is Ellen Peterson, Mark Peterson's wife." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then the voice returned, softer, imbued with a gentle sadness. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, "I've been expecting your call." The words, "I've been expecting your call," sent a jolt of electricity through me. They were confirmation. They were validation. They were the first glimmer of dawn after a long, dark night. David's face had paled. The smirk was gone, replaced by a stony mask of fury. "What is the meaning of this, Ellen? Who are you talking to?" I held up a hand to silence him, my full attention on the voice on the phone. "Mr. Abernathy, my husband's brother just had a will read. It leaves everything to him. It says I have to be out of my house in 24 hours. "Ignore that document, Mrs. Peterson," the voice on the phone said, calm and reassuring. It is not legally binding. Mr. Thompson is not your husband's acting attorney of record. I am." The room fell silent. Even Cynthia's perpetual look of disdain was replaced by one of stunned disbelief. "Mr." Thompson froze, his hand hovering over the clasp of his briefcase, his face ashen. He looked like a man caught in a trap. "Can you meet with me?" I asked, my voice pleading. "Right now?" "Of course," Mr. Abernathy said. "My office is on Grant Avenue. Do you know where that is?" "I'll find it," I said. I scribbled the address he gave me on the back of the eviction notice, the irony not lost on me. "And, Mrs. Peterson," he added, his voice firm, "do not leave your home. Do not let them intimidate you. You are exactly where you are supposed to be. I will see you in 30 minutes." He hung up. I lowered the phone, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. For the first time since Mark died, I felt like I was on solid ground. I turned to David. "I'm going to see Mr. Abernathy, and as he said, I'm not going anywhere." David's face contorted with rage. "This is a farce! Some senile old lawyer Mark spoke to once. The will we have is valid. Thompson, tell her!" All eyes turned to Mr. Thompson, who seemed to shrink in on himself under the weight of our collective gaze. He licked his lips nervously. "The will, the document I read it is an executed document," he stammered. "Is it the most recent one?" I pressed, taking a step toward him. "Is it Mark Peterson's final will and testament?" Thompson couldn't meet my eyes. He looked at the floor, at the ceiling, at David. He looked anywhere but at me. His silence was the only answer I needed. "Get out," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "What?" Cynthia scoffed. "You can't speak to us like that. This is David's house now." "Get out!" I roared, the sound tearing from my throat, raw and full of a week's worth of repressed pain and anger. "All of you, get out of my house. Now." Leo, who had been watching the scene unfold with wide eyes, stood up and came to my side, slipping his small hand into mine. His presence was a silent declaration of solidarity. We were a team. David looked from me to the urn on the table, his expression murderous. For a second, I thought he might get violent, but something in my eyes must have stopped him. The look of a mother protecting her child. He scoffed, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Fine. Have your little fantasy. We'll be back with the authorities in the morning to see you escorted from the premises. This changes nothing." He stormed out, Cynthia scurrying behind him like a malevolent shadow. Mr. Thompson gathered his briefcase and practically ran for the door, not daring to look back. The front door slammed shut, and the silence that descended upon the house was different once again. It wasn't heavy with grief or crackling with tension. It was a silence of anticipation, a silence filled with possibility. I knelt down and pulled Leo into a fierce hug, burying my face in his hair. "Thank you," I whispered. "Oh, baby, thank you. You were so brave." He hugged me back tightly. "Dad told me to be," he said, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "Dad told me to. He said you'd know what to do." I pulled back, wiping a tear from my cheek. I looked at my son, my brave, wonderful son. Mark hadn't left us, not really. He had left us a lifeline. He had left us Leo, and he had left us the name of a man who held the truth. "Come on," I said, standing up and grabbing my purse and keys. "Let's go meet Mr. Abernathy." Mr. Abernathy's office was in an old, dignified brick building downtown. It was the complete opposite of the soulless, modern glass and steel high-rise where Mr. Thompson's firm was located. The inside was warm and welcoming, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, comfortable leather chairs, and the faint, pleasant smell of old paper and lemon polish. Arthur Abernathy himself was a man who seemed to belong to another era. He was in his late 70s, with a full head of white hair, kind blue eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and a gentle demeanor that immediately put me at ease. He greeted us not with a handshake, but with a warm, sad smile. "Mrs. Peterson, Leo," he said, his voice as kind in person as it was on the phone. "Please, come in. Sit down. I'm so terribly sorry for your loss. Mark was a good man, one of the best." He led us to the chairs in front of his large oak desk. He didn't speak to Leo like a child, but like a young man who had just carried a great responsibility. "You did well, son," he said, looking at Leo with profound respect. Your father would be so proud of you. Leo, who had been quiet and nervous, seemed to relax. He gave a small, shy smile. Once we were settled, Mr. Abernathy folded his hands on his desk. I imagine you have a lot of questions. Everything, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Why was there another will? Why did Mark hide this from me? Who is Mr. Thompson? Mr. Abernathy took a deep breath. Mark came to see me about 6 months ago. He was worried. He discovered some financial irregularities in the company books. It seemed his brother, David, had been embezzling money for years. Not large amounts at first, just enough to fund a lifestyle beyond his means. But it was escalating. My stomach twisted. Mark had been stressed about the business, but I thought it was just the economy. He had carried this burden alone. Mark confronted him, Mr. Abernathy continued. David denied it, of course, but Mark had the proof. He gave David a choice: pay the money back quietly, or Mark would go to the police. He wanted to give his brother a chance to make it right, for the sake of the family. And at the same time, the lawyer said, his expression turning grave, Mark received some difficult medical news. He had the same hereditary condition that took his father, a weakness in the arterial walls of the brain. The doctors told him there was a high-risk surgery he could try, but the prognosis wasn't good either way. He didn't tell you because he didn't want to worry you. He wanted you and Leo to live normally for as long as possible. Tears streamed down my face. The secret surgery, the distraction, the worry in his eyes. It all clicked into place. He wasn't pulling away from me. He was trying to protect me. He knew, Mr. Abernathy said softly, that if he died, David would be a shark in the water. He believed David would do anything to get his hands on the business and the house to cover his debts and his tracks. So, he made a plan. A very clever, very careful plan. He explained that Mark had hired him to draft his real will. Then, Mark went to Mr. Thompson, the family lawyer he knew David trusted, and had him draft the fake one. He told Thompson it was a temporary measure for a business deal, a plausible lie that the greedy lawyer accepted, especially when David later offered him a hefty sum to expedite the probate process and ensure it was the only will presented. The first will was bait, Mr. Abernathy said. Mark knew David's greed. He wanted David to expose himself, to show his true colors in a legally documented way. The eviction notice, the contemptuous treatment of you and Leo, Mark predicted all of it. He wanted witnesses to David's character. And Leo's role in all this? That was the failsafe, Mr. Abernathy said, his eyes twinkling with admiration for his late client's foresight. Mark was worried that something might happen to me, or that my files could be lost or stolen. He needed a key that only you could use, one that David couldn't possibly know about. So he entrusted it to the person he knew was the strongest and most reliable in the world, his son. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a large manila envelope sealed with wax. This is the real will, Mrs. Peterson. And this, he said, pulling out a slim laptop, is what your husband really wanted you to see. He turned the laptop toward me and pressed play. Mark's face filled the screen. He was in this very office, looking tired but determined. He looked directly into the camera, as if he were looking right at me. Ellen, he began, his voice thick with a love that transcended the screen. If you're seeing this, it means the worst has happened. I'm so sorry, my love. I'm sorry for all the secrets. I just wanted to protect you. Mr. Abernathy arranged the meeting for the following morning, back in my living room. He had called David, informing him that new information regarding Mark's estate had come to light, and his presence, along with Mr. Thompson's, was required. The arrogance in David must have been blinding, because he agreed immediately, likely assuming he was coming to finalize his victory and oversee my removal from the property. When David and Cynthia arrived, they were smugness personified. David strode in, his chest puffed out, while Cynthia was already mentally redecorating, her eyes flicking dismissively over our family photos. Mr. Thompson trailed behind them, looking pale and sweating in the cool morning air. They stopped short when they saw Mr. Abernathy sitting calmly in Mark's armchair, the laptop open on the coffee table in front of him. "Who is this?" David demanded, pointing a finger at the old lawyer. "This is Arthur Abernathy," I said, my voice clear and steady. I was standing by the fireplace with Leo by my side. "My husband's attorney." "Your husband's attorney is Mr. Thompson," Cynthia snapped. "Mr. Thompson was an unwitting pawn in a much larger game, I'm afraid," Mr. Abernathy said pleasantly. "A game he will have to answer for to the state bar. But that is a conversation for another time. We are here today to execute the actual last will and testament of Mark Peterson." David's face darkened. "This is absurd. The will was read. It's done." "Not quite," Mr. Abernathy said. He gestured to the sofa. "Please, have a seat. Mark left a message for all of us." With a palpable sense of dread, they sat. Mr. Abernathy pressed the spacebar. Mark's face appeared on the screen. The video started with his loving message to me and Leo, a heartbreaking and beautiful testament to his love that had me weeping silently. He told Leo how proud he was, how much he loved him, and that being his father was the greatest joy of his life. Then Mark's tone shifted. The warmth vanished, replaced by an icy resolve. He looked into the camera as if staring directly into his brother's soul. "And now, David," he said, his voice low and laced with contempt. "Did you really think I didn't know? Did you think I was that stupid?" The video then laid out David's crimes in meticulous, irrefutable detail. Mark displayed scanned copies of falsified invoices, secret bank statements, and a clear accounting of the more than $500,000 David had siphoned from the company over the last 5 years. He detailed the confrontation, David's lies, and Mark's misplaced hope that his brother would do the right thing. David was ashen-faced, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Cynthia stared at the screen, then at her husband, her expression a mixture of horror and fury. "The will you had read yesterday, David," Mark continued on the screen, "was a test, a final test to see if you had a single shred of decency or family loyalty left in you. You failed. You tried to make my wife and son homeless 24 hours after you handed them my ashes. You danced on my grave before the dirt even had time to settle." Mark paused, taking a deep breath. "So, here is my real will. Everything, the house, my personal assets, and my 50% share of the business, goes to my wife, Ellen, to be held in trust for my son, Leo. As for your 50% share, David, well, that's going to be a problem for you. Abernathy paused the video. He opened the manila envelope and produced a sheaf of papers. "Mark also left this," he said, his voice calm but firm. "A complete forensic audit of the company. It details not only the embezzlement, but also tax fraud. This entire file was messengered to the district attorney's office an hour ago." The color drained completely from David's face. He looked at Thompson, who was staring at the floor. The picture of misery. "You're facing multiple felony charges, David," Mr. Abernathy stated simply. "Embezzlement, wire fraud, tax evasion. Given the evidence, I imagine you'll be looking at significant prison time." Cynthia let out a small, strangled cry. She stood up, looked at her husband with pure disgust, and said, "You idiot, you ruined us." Then she turned and walked out of the house, and out of his life, without a backward glance. David just sat there, broken. The vulture was grounded, his wings broken. He was no longer a predator, just a common thief caught in a brilliant posthumous trap. The fight was over. Mark had won. 6 months later, the silence in the house was different again. It was a comfortable, peaceful quiet, filled not with absence, but with presence. It was the sound of Leo doing his homework at the kitchen table, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of leaves in the oak tree Mark had planted in the front yard. It was the sound of home. The legal storm had passed, leaving a clean, clear sky in its wake. David had pleaded guilty to avoid a drawn-out trial. He was sentenced to 5 to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. The court had ordered his share of the business to be liquidated to pay restitution and back taxes. With Mr. Abernathy's guidance, I used some of Mark's life insurance to buy out the remaining shares. making Peterson and Sons construction entirely mine and Leo's. I promoted Mark's most trusted foreman to run the day-to-day operations, and the business was thriving. Mr. Thompson was disbarred for his role in knowingly presenting a false will and his unethical conduct. Cynthia had filed for divorce the week after the confrontation, vanishing back to whatever wealthy family she had come from. They were all just ghosts now, footnotes in a painful chapter of our lives that was now closed. I stood at the kitchen window, watching Leo throw a baseball against the garage door, just as Mark had taught him. He was smiling again, a real full-face smile that lit up his eyes. The haunted, withdrawn boy was gone, replaced by a confident young man who knew his father's love was a fortress that could never be breached. I still missed Mark with an ache that would likely never fade completely, but the sharp, debilitating pain had softened into a gentle, loving memory. I felt his presence not as a gaping wound, but as a quiet strength inside me. He had taken care of us, even from beyond the grave. His foresight, his love, and his unwavering faith in his son had saved us. Leo saw me watching and waved. I smiled and waved back. Later that evening, as I was tucking him into bed, he looked up at me from his pillow. "Mom," he said, "Bed, do you think Dad knows we're okay?" I sat on the edge of his bed and smoothed the hair back from his forehead. "I know he does, sweetie," I said, my voice soft. "He didn't just leave us a house and a business. He left us a plan. He left us a future." He nodded, his eyes growing heavy with sleep. "Those 7 words were pretty important, huh?" I leaned down and kissed his forehead, my heart swelling with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "Yes, they were," I whispered. "They were the 7 most important words in the world." They were the words that had turned the darkest night into a new dawn. They were the key that had unlocked our future, a legacy of love from a man who had thought of everything, all because he had loved us more than anything. And in the quiet peace of our home, I knew we were going to be all right.